All right, in this final lesson, we're actually going to incorporate external, embedded, and inline style sheets all into the same set of web pages on a website. So it's going to be for Blue Cell Incorporated, a technology-based website. And as I said, we're going to make all three different types of style sheets within this web page. So what you see on this right-hand side is what the web page currently looks like with no styling added. So here you can see it actually uses a frame definition file. And you can see it has a couple of different websites being displayed, has a menu bar off to the side. And what happens here is if I click through, you can see that none of these web pages really have any styling associated with them. But you have your contact page, your products page, a page where you can submit any questions, and then you can go back to that home page. So all of these different pages are actually on my classroom website right now, besides the stylesheet.css. That's the one we're going to create. So what you'll need to do at some point before moving on too far into this video is you'll need to go download everything from my classroom website. And when you go there, what you'll see is there are quite a few files. So what I would suggest is that you actually make a Unit 7 folder, just like you have with previous units, and that you then make an in-class project folder and that you download all of these files in there with their names as is. So these first couple are all HTML files, .htms. You can leave them with .htm. They'll be just fine. And then the rest of these are all of the images that you'll be loading in. So what I would do right now is I would pause the video. I would get all of those downloaded and loaded in. And then I would move forward where we'll start adding an embedded style sheet into our program. Okay, so at this point, you should have all of these downloaded. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to open up the menu page in Notepad++. And you can open it up in your browser too, that's fine. But I want you to open up that menu page in Notepad++. And this is what you should currently see. So you can see this is just a basic page. It's got a variety of links on it. And it's basically the little menu screen that's making everything appear in the main frame. So here, when we say we're modifying the menu page, and I can even run this in Chrome to show you, this is actually what we're working with. So this is our web page in full we have the index running and we have the frame definition file. We're just working with the menu page right now, and that's where we're going to add that embedded style sheet simply because this page is a little bit different with these big key links off to the side. So that's what we're going to be altering. Now, we're going to talk through a couple of key styling things that are a little bit different than the last embedded style sheet that we made. So some stylings we're going to add to this page is we're going to style the paragraphs, we're going to style those hyperlinks, we're going to change the font face or the font family and increase the size of that text. And then we're going to set what's called a hover link change. And you'll see what happens when we do that. So a couple of extra notes on styling that you just want to kind of keep in mind is that you can actually set a text indent, like we've talked about before, to be something like 20 points, or you can actually set it to be percentage-wise relative to the size of the screen. And you've seen the difference between these absolute and relative sizings many times before. So just taking a note that some things like text indent, they can take in the information in two ways. You can say indent it 20 points or indent it 10% of the browser window. So kind of an extra side note there. Then another thing that we can do, and we've seen this when we've used a hover, I've talked about a hover before, is we can actually be a little bit more specific with when we want that styling to take place. So here we have a link, a visited, and a active. So what we can do is we can use that a tag. So we have that typical link tag, and we can say, well, when a link is just being clicked on for the first time, I want it to do this. So a:link and then my styling. If it's been visited, I want it to do this. So a:visited. And if it's the current active clickable link, a:active. So by using that colon after our a style selector, we can actually say, well, we want this tag when this is happening to get this styling. So we can actually be more specific than just the tag or just the use of classes. Now, I've talked about text decoration a little. I talked about the none option, but you see if you look in your packet that there's a couple of different options that you can also add. You can add things like blink. You can add things like line through. You can add an overline or an underline. And what's actually really cool about text decoration is you can actually do multiple styles together. And you can experiment with this with other styling types, but you can do multiple styles together by just saying text decoration colon and then listing multiple things and then putting a semicolon at the end if you have more styling. So you'll notice here it's just underline, space, overline. And what this will do with this particular text decoration is it will give you an underline and an overline. So if you'd like to do multiple styles together, you simply do what you're trying to change, that property you're trying to change, and then you give it two values separated by a space. Now, a couple of other things that you'll see, especially when dealing with font families, is you'll notice in browsers that not all fonts are available. Most of those common fonts are available all of the time, but some of the more special fonts are not. So there's two special notes I want you to make when dealing with font families that you'll kind of want to remember. The first is that oftentimes you'll see two fonts listed after their styling separated by a comma. So on the previous page, they were separated by a space, and that meant apply both stylings. If you have two values separated by a comma after that property, what this does is it says, apply this first font. If it's not available, apply the second font. So you can actually have backup fonts and say, well, Verdana is my first choice, Garamond is my second choice, and you can have as many as you'd like to just say, well, in case something goes wrong, then I'm going to use these fonts. Now, the final piece here, and this is really important for any of you that like to use fonts that contain spaces, is if a font name has spaces, you actually need to encapsulate it in quotations. So you'll see here you have font family colon and then Times New Roman with quotations around it. And that's because, as you saw on the previous slide, a space means a second thing is applied. So here we have underline and overline. Whereas here, Times New Roman is one name. And so we can group it together as one name by using quotations. So any font name with spaces will need to have those quotations around it. Now from here, I do want to talk about hover a little bit because it's very, very similar to the A link, A visited, and A active that you saw back here. But what hover does is it actually defines how the link appears when the mouse hovers over it. And this one we're really going to apply into our program today so we can see how that works. So you've all been on websites before where when you hover, it actually has a different look than when you aren't hovering. And that's what this particular font or this particular styling does. A:hover will actually change what happens when you hover over it. And hover can be used with a variety of tags as well. So now we're actually going to dive in and we're going to start coding. So you should have menu open and we're going to insert our embedded style sheet. Now, if you remember back from when we first styled our first embedded style sheet a couple of lessons ago, we always start off with those styling tags. That's something that we always need to add in. And then in order to add in our styling for our web page, we also need to put in comment codes just in case for some reason the browser does not support CSS. So we put it in comment, so if it doesn't support CSS, it can still display everything. It just will not contain styling. So just making those extra notes. Now here, this is the actual styling we're going to add into this page. So remember, inside the style tag, we always do type equals text/CSS to say what type of styling we are applying. And then in here, just as we did in a previous lesson, we're going to style the paragraphs, the links, and the links when they're hovered. So here we have our paragraph tag that is being altered, and we're saying text-indent. We want to be 20-point font, or 20 points in, excuse me. We then are going to style our links to have a text decoration of none. We separate it by a semicolon, and we then have a font family of Verdana. But in case that doesn't work, we have a backup font of Garamond. And then we do a semicolon to signal the next font. Font size is equal to 12-point font. And the color is going to be black. So we are styling our normal links to look like this. Now from here, we're going to style our hover as well. And we'll do that in the next video. And you'll see how hover actually applies. And then we'll see how this embedded style sheet works all together.